Welcome back, after a long time, to Combat Mission Cold War, where we're going to take a stab at the second half of the NTC training campaign. This time we're fighting in Red Pass, where B Company is screening the flank of the Battalion. This is supposed to be a quiet sector, which means, because this is the NTC, that an OPFOR motor rifle battalion is heading our way. Having a choice between fighting a delaying action or conducting a counterattack, I've chosen to counterattack because, well, that's probably going to upset the enemy more. Their aim is most likely to break through B Company's position in order to get into the battalion rear areas. The commander's intent coming down to us is to delay them for 20 minutes until reinforcements from A Company team can arrive, then to destroy them. Nice and simple. The catch is that my force needs to remain operationally viable in the process. There are 1,710 victory points on the table for destroying the enemy, with another 800 for knocking them below 50% strength, and 400 for degrading them beyond 60% condition. On the friendly side, there are 600 points available for keeping casualties under 25%, and 300 for keeping friendly condition over 30%. Or in other words, smack the other guy around without getting beat up in the process. I have the bulk of B Company team for this, which is a mixed rifle company. Under the company HQ and FO, we have 1st Platoon, a rifle platoon riding in M113s, 3rd Platoon, consisting of 5 M60A1s, and then the company mortar section from 4th Platoon with 3 M125s. Attached for this mission, there's also an M136A1 AA vehicle, and I have 5 target reference points to designate. The 2nd Rifle Platoon and the 2 M150 Tank Hunters from 4th Platoon have been reassigned elsewhere. The infantry have 1 Dragon ATGM between them. They're mostly relying on M72 Laws, and while they can carry a lot of them, the lack of Dragon and the missing tows mean that the only real long-range anti-tank firepower I have to start with are the 105mm guns on the M60s. There are reinforcements on the way though. Some of the battalion artillery is relocating and will be online after 5 minutes, adding 2 sections of M109A3s with cluster munitions to the party. After 15 minutes, 2 AH-1S Cobras will arrive, hopefully carrying an unreasonable amount of tows, and finally at the 20-minute mark elements of A Company team will turn up. Another M60A1 platoon and another rifle platoon. There is one important caveat here. It's been so long since I played the first half of the campaign that I've managed to delete the save files that went with it. So to get here, I've ceasefired my way through the first couple of missions, and that basically means that I'm operating without having incurred any casualties, vehicle losses, or expended any ammunition that I otherwise would have. This is somewhat mitigated by having quite high chances for replacements and ammunition resupply between the missions before going into this scenario, but I am probably in a better state than I would be otherwise. The enemy, meanwhile, is templated to be an entire motor rifle battalion in BMPs, potentially with attack helicopter support, and no doubt a shed load of artillery, arriving from the east in 3 waves. Kicking things off, there is at least a company of BMPs coming in from Red Pass Lake behind Hill 636.2. From the previous missions, it's sensible to expect OPFOR to move fast and put the pressure on from the word go. This could cause some problems because the terrain is much more broken up than it was in the earlier missions. It's easiest to split this map into 3 sections. Running broadly north-northeast to south-southwest is the Britta Springs MSR. This has flat open ground on either side, so it's going to be a critical kill zone for me to cover and for OPFOR to cross. To the west of the MSR we have some corrugated terrain. This is less dramatic than the terrain back in Brown Pass, but there are plenty of linear ridges and valleys that are going to offer a lot of cover, concealment and defilade opportunities. This is fantastic for me because I can move my force around undercover to get into the right positions at the right time, but if the enemy gets into it, the game changes somewhat and suddenly it's all about snap close range engagements that are a lot chancier. Finally, to the east of the MSR, the ground is mostly flat and includes the dry bed of Red Pass Lake, but in the south there is Hill 636.2, which shields off a good chunk of Red Pass Lake, and underneath the hill there's a ridge running from point 606.1 through reference 2033 to the map edge parallel to the MSR. Putting it all together then, I reckon this is going to come down to whether OPFOR can get across the MSR. Realistically, my critical asset is the M60s. The artillery and Cobras are solid, but actually getting them on time and on target can be tough, so it's going to come down to the tanks. Assuming the main opposition will be BMPs, the M60s can certainly take them on, but the sheer numbers of BMPs available are likely to be a problem, especially considering that they all mount ATGMs. The last thing I want is a head-on fight, because it doesn't give me any advantages, so what I really want to do is get a force out onto my left to engage the enemy from flanking defilade positions in the hills up there, and savage them as they attempt to cross the MSR. That sounds good, but while the enemy looks poised to attack from behind Hill 636.2, probably using it as an ATGM and observation post in the process, they have 3 companies at their disposal and they could pop up anywhere along the eastern map edge. I'm willing to bet that at least one, if not OPFOR's main effort, is going to come down hard on my left through those hills. So sending a force off onto that flank brings some inherent risk. I've got to get there to begin with, which could be risky given that there's little cover along the way, and the possibility of enemy overwatch already in position on that hill. It's probably smarter to stick to my deployment area, even if that risks getting a sky full of artillery on turn 1. Overall, I've made a tiny compromise. One M60 is heading out left to cover the dead ground in front of the others, who are all facing off against the east. They're all hulled down, and I want to see if I can get some long-range engagements while OPFOR is deploying to try and even things up a bit before we start. It's much harder to know what to do with the rifle platoon because they're so short-ranged, though they are at least mounted so I can send them where I need them. The mortars, HQ assets and AA are all tucked into a valley in the rear. There is some early intelligence suggesting that there are some OPFOR light vehicles, either trucks or BTRs, behind Hill 636. These are probably important. They could be mortar teams, manpads or other specialists, so I'm giving them a quick stonk with the 125's 81mm mortars right off the bat. As for the rest, we'll see. And of course, what we do see when the game starts is my expectations starting to conflict with reality. Contacts start popping up straight away, the M60s start to engage them, but those targets are anything from 1800 to 2500 meters away, and hitting them on the first try is a serious challenge with the old M60A1. The 81mm mortars, also firing at long range from an on-map position, are neither accurate nor quick. The bombs have to go up and come down, unlike off-map artillery, and they start falling on turn 2, by which point anything hanging around in the fire mission area has probably moved off, and the impacts are so widely dispersed that if there is anything still there, they probably haven't actually hit anything. It's not until the third turn that one of the M60s scores a hit, immobilising a BMP at 2,200 meters, but shortly afterwards another one is knocked out by an AT3. The leading BMPs have taken up a position on that 606 to 2033 ridge, where they are happily sitting and spotting en masse. I can see them, courtesy of an FO team I've stuck on top of point 632-1, but the M60s are struggling. This always happens when I switch from the World War II games to the more modern ones. With Cold War somewhat in between, I've gone in with an over-optimistic perception of what the M60s are capable of. They can't reliably take on a swarm of BMPs at these ranges the way an Abrams can in Black Sea, and because it's 1982, those AT3s mounted on these Soviet vehicles are a serious threat. Another M60 goes up, and I pull them back from their firing positions with a casual 40% loss of my starting tank force, and nothing else that can reach out and touch the enemy. The cluster artillery arrives at least, and I begin to call missions in, just as another company of BMPs arrives on Red Pass Lake. This immediately starts to head off to my left, screened by the first company. That's a serious worry, but it does present an opportunity. The M60s can use the terrain to shield themselves from the view of OPFOR's overwatch and engage the second company as it transits right to left, a little bit of classic defilade. I've only got a single tank on the job though, and it's an exercise in hitting moving targets past the 2000 meter mark. The gunner manages to score a couple of kills, but that's not exactly a dent in OPFOR's capabilities. The DPICM is coming into similar muted effect. I've called it down on the screening BMPs, but they're just too dispersed for it to have much effect. There are a few hits, but again, nothing that feels meaningful. 10 minutes in, and a third OPFOR company arrives. It starts to follow the second company off towards my left, prompting me to adjust my artillery to try and give them a DPICM gauntlet to run, but they change direction and start stacking up in the centre, exactly where my artillery had just stopped falling because it's adjusted to where the enemy is now not going. At the 15-minute mark, having knocked out a meagre handful of BMPs and lost 2 out of 5 of my only useful direct fire units in the process, OPFOR kicks off its attack. The screening and centre companies begin to push down the Bitter Springs MSR towards my right flank, while the second company starts advancing on the left. This is really excellent news. Against a stationary wall of BMPs at long range, my M60A1s were at a severe disadvantage. A mass of OPFOR vehicles closing the distance, meaning that they are simultaneously becoming easier targets and decreasing their own ability to spot and engage, is exactly what I want. I'm hardly out of the woods, being forced to deploy my rifle platoon out of their M113s and take up positions to cover my right in case the enemy punch through, as well as having to shift another FO to get eyes on that flank and redirect some DPICM to block any attempts to roll me up. But the M60s are finally able to really go to work. Out on the left, the M60 I threw out to cover the front of the deployment zone starts to rack up kills, aided by the other two M60s near reference 2124, one watching the right and the other covering the left. There's a steady, if slow, rising tally of BMP kills, which is obviously good news, but it's not enough to actually stop the OPFOR battalion. 3 M60A1s are just not enough to get the job done. This is particularly worrying on the left, where the BMPs start streaming past my flanking M60 and disappear behind Hill 644.2. 20 minutes in, a company team arrives. Another 5 M60s is exactly what I need right now. I split the platoon, with 2 moving to cover the left, and the other 3 moving to join my right-hand FO in defilade, where they can cover the lower reaches at the MSR. I don't really have a job for the other assets. They're probably going to contribute just as much sitting safely in the wadi where they arrived as they would sitting around getting shot at, though I throw a rifle squad out on my left, where the shorter sightline out to Hill 644 means they can put their dragon to use if anything comes over the crest line. The reinforcements are just in time too. I've gone a little lax with the original M60 covering the right, and it eats an 83. After a few more turns, there's actually a chunk of quiet. I feel like I'm in a much more solid position. OPFOR is closer, sure, but I've been reinforced and can count 17 BMP wrecks on the field. Optimistically, that's about halfway there, and OPFOR has the same problem it had since it kicked off its attack. It has to move forward into my kill zones. The BMPs keep advancing and they keep getting picked off. It's not spectacular, it's not dramatic, but a kill or two a minute quietly racks up to something significant. With the enemy looking to be running out of steam and the BMPs spending increasing time stationary, I'm even able to adjust the DPICM out of its blocking role and directly onto them, scoring a handful of hits and, hopefully, mangling any nearby enemy dismounts. It's not all sunshine and rainbows though. OPFOR have brought some helicopters to the party. These are no doubt Hinds of some description, and while the Vulcan manages to down one, it runs out of ammunition targeting the others. Unthreatened by AA fire and free to choose their targets, the Hinds focus down the vehicles I have crammed into the waddies in the rear. After quickly picking off the unarmoured mules and their passengers with chin turret fire, they move on to strafing the M113s. These are not as proof against heavy machine gun fire as I would like, with rounds punching through rear doors and top hatches to inflict casualties inside. I don't particularly have anywhere to move them to, lest they attract the attention of some BMPs, and confined to the waddies it's hard to disperse them. Moving on to unguided rockets, one of A Company's rifle platoon vehicles takes a direct hit and a whole squad is wiped out. It's frustrating, but there's not much I can actually do about it. The enemy at least has to put up with it as well. My Cobras are finally getting stuck in after a 12-minute call-in time, and I've been lucky enough that one BMP platoon has strayed into the mission area. The Cobras get some rockets in, but they're really a minor complement to the work the M60s have been doing. On the right, the threat has essentially evaporated. I can see some OPFOR infantry running around, but they're not actually going to reach me before the timer runs out. The left is a different question, with the enemy still lurking behind Hill 644. I've sent a rifle squad forward to take a look, and they confirm that there are at least half a dozen BMPs on the other side of the peak before they get machine gunned. I really don't have the inclination to go after them, especially after trying to manoeuvre the flanking M60 to get a good angle on one, sees it receive yet another 83 to the face. I have just about enough time left to adjust the DPICM and send a Cobra over, but the artillery is running low on ammo and the helicopter will take another agonising 12 minutes to get on target. Luckily, to some definition of luckily, OPFOR tries to kick things up in the last few minutes and makes a play. Two BMPs come over the flanks of Hill 644, one is taken out by an M60, the other is hit by a Dragon. Pushing some rifle squads up sees them shot to pieces by superior OPFOR infantry, another expectation falling short of reality, but the timer has run down to 0. There is some variable extra time, but I'm clearly not going anywhere and OPFOR doesn't have the capacity to kick me out of my position, so I hit ceasefire. It's a minor defeat for the US, with 1,987 victory points to OPFOR's 3,391. I've lost 26 men killed, 24 wounded, 4 M60s to BMP launched AT3s, and an M113 and M125, and 2 M151A2 mules taken out by the Hinds. OPFOR, on the other hand, have lost 176 men dead, with 15 wounded, 30 BMPs knocked out, and 1 other vehicle. The weird dead to wounded ratio in this case is almost certainly to do with infantry being caught inside their BMPs before they could dismount. That is one shredded BMP battalion. Although the battalion support elements are safe behind Hill 636, where my early mortars achieved absolutely nothing, the 3 attacking companies have been knocked about hard. There are 3 surviving BMPs on the right and 4 on the left, and while there are still plenty of infantry everywhere, I don't fancy their chances in the desert without transport. This doesn't look too bad. The kicker is the infantry losses on my side. Of OPFOR's total 3,391 points, they got 2,486 of them for destroying my infantry dismounts. Some of those losses were, granted, the results of a couple of squads skirmishing on the left towards the end, but most of them were caused by the Hinds, so it feels a little harsh to be so heavily punished by something so reliant on chance. If the Vulcan had shot more Hinds down, or if the Hinds had selected different targets, then things could have panned out differently. The elements that I had control over, like dispersion and keeping the M113s moving, would probably have helped a little, but fundamentally it feels a little bit out of my hands. I reckon being able to stash those vehicles in a village or woodblock in West Germany would have significantly reduced the Hinds' impact. Of course though, the NTC isn't supposed to be fair. That is actually the last mission in the campaign though. Having lost the files from the first 2 battles like a smart person, there's not much to actually see on the campaign end screen. It is a branching campaign though, and there are some choices I didn't take with slightly different missions behind them, so we might be heading back to the NTC at some point to fully complete it. It's a tough campaign, but I really would recommend it. It really helps you get into the headspace you need to start understanding Combat Mission Cold War. Hope you all enjoyed this one, and I'll catch you in the next video.